On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Jeff Byrnes. He is the SRE Manager at athenahealth. We're going to be talking about a few different things, but mainly we're going to be talking about the opportunities that exist at non-tech companies. Jeff has a really interesting background, has a deep background in tech startups. He's moved on to a more mature, non-software, non-technology focused company. He's going to explain to us what that means in his world and some of the opportunities that lay in front of him in terms of bringing in his expertise and helping athenahealth navigate the cloud world. Jeff, thanks for being on the podcast.
Yeah, no, thanks so much, Amir. Appreciate you having me here. Really lovely opportunity.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I guess we always start off with two things initially. One, I know a lot of people have heard about it, athenahealth, but I think it's always great to hear from you what the company does. And SRE Manager, again, just what falls in your lap as what the responsibilities look like for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So athenahealth is a software as a service provider of back-end healthcare services for individual and small group practice healthcare providers. So your doctor's office, your family pediatrician, and then also some larger practices and some hospitals. So the folks who handle your booking and your billing and your insurance, that's a big part of our product. And we try to make that so easy that, doctors can be doctors, as we like to say. It's one of our catchphrases. We don't want your doctor worrying about how to bill you when you're telling them that your knee hurts or something. That's not helpful. So that's our big thing. And so like you said, we make software and we're a software company, but our customers aren't. And the goal is so that they don't have to worry about software as much as possible. That's really what we try to do.
And then your actual responsibilities as an SRE manager, I'm just kind of curious how different it is or how similar it might be to previous jobs that you've had.
Yeah, definitely different. Previously I've been an IC and I've been a lead engineer, mostly in the operations space. But here at Athena, we're a hybrid cloud and on-premise company. And my team entirely lives on-premise. And that was a big change for me. And so I help lead a team of now 10 engineers, help to take care of the main software offering, AthenaNet, which is what gets used for back offices for doctors and stuff. And as you might imagine, with many customers, it's very critical that we keep that up all the time and make sure it's well cared for. And we interact with almost 200 different teams to make that happen. So it's a really broad set of responsibilities all the way from L1 all the way up to L7 in terms of network levels and Linux stuff. And the list goes on and on. It's a broad set of responsibilities. So I've got a lot of different folks in the stable helping me keep it alive. And I'm just here to make sure that they know which way to go. And we all mostly march in the same direction.
Absolutely. I guess just to be an interesting to kind of pick your brain on, I don't know if you were approached by athenahealth or you applied or whatever the case was, but once you start getting through the interview process and you start realizing, you're moving to more of an on-premise solution coming from, a couple of, cool, I know, somebody can go on LinkedIn and see kind of what you've done. I know you worked at a cool startup called that I guess Apple acquired about the weather app. We won't name names if it's okay or not. I don't know, but somebody could go on LinkedIn and look that up. But when you're kind of looking at, through the interview process and all of a sudden you're realizing I'm going to an on-premise solution from all these, cool, tech startups, all these toys you had. What was your original thought? Like, what were you thinking when you were like, hey, this is a different challenge, but I'm completely leaving behind some things that I was doing that was more maybe cutting edge?
Yeah, my initial response was, is this really where I want to go? And that's, total honesty. The world of healthcare being so compliance heavy, on-premise, legacy software, legacy hardware, was not attractive to me. And it wasn't something I went looking for. But, when I was looking for a place to work at the beginning of 2019, after I'd left Dark Sky, the company you were mentioning, the weather app company, where I had a lovely 2.5 years working there, I was just poking around. I took some interviews and a friend of mine who works at Athena reached out. He was like, hey, I know you're looking. I need people on my team and I'm going to tell you all about it, warts and all. And, ended up going along with it. He just laid it all out totally transparently. And, the big point was like, yes, there's all of these things that might be off-putting, but let's look at them flip it around. Let's look at them as challenges. Here's an opportunity to grow and understand, what really goes into all of those cloud offerings you use every day. Like to really understand how valuable that stuff is. You can just go out and buy it or, and rent it and so forth. Here we have to build it from the bottom up and we have to think about it and we have to look down the road. And then here's all these other challenges around, how do you actually navigate, a 25-year-old piece of software that's been built up over and over and over again. This is serious legacy stuff. This is late 90s, early 2000s era tech still floating around in my everyday. And, that's the reality for a lot of us. And, to think it's all green fields forever in the lovely land of small venture-backed startups, is to miss huge opportunities, I think, to look for different challenges and very different opportunities to make an impact on the world.
Absolutely. Yeah, I like how you mentioned, obviously that's legacy software that's still being supported, still being used. Something you mentioned about giving up some of the greenfield VC-backed opportunities and kind of exchanging that for a more mature organization. Were there any, I guess, standout, things that you observed day one, day two, week one, where you're like, hey, I'm a startup guy, and all of a sudden now, obviously, it's an established public company, it's a well-known brand, but what hits you the first week out of curiosity?
Certainly going into a really compliance-driven space, the extra heavy there is tough. I'm not going to pull any punches on that. It's like, if you want to get to the servers, you have to log in here with these credentials and then provide this second factor with this other thing. And that now you can get to the data center and poke around in prod, and you've got pseudo rights, but we have passwords everywhere. There's all this, sort of heavy duty security stuff. And so that was definitely like an immediate, just hands-on keyboard engineer type. Whoa, okay, this is definitely different. Whereas previously at a 6-person firm, you can just boom, you log right into a production server. And, there's very few walls, generally speaking, if you're already inside the house. So getting the hang of those things, getting an understanding of that was definitely one interesting element. But on more of the people side of things was really coming to grips with just how big a firm like Athena. And Athena is not that big. Athena is about 6,000 people. So it's not like we're GM with hundreds of thousands, or even Comcast with tens of thousands, or however big they are, I guess. Just throwing that off the top of my head. But even with 6,000 people, to go from, Dark Sky was like 6 when I left, and Evertrue before that was 70 when I left, so suddenly, 100x people from the biggest company I'd ever worked for. It was like, there's just a lot more people to talk to figure things out and to move forward. And all those people just represent all the moving parts under the hood that they're all responsible for. So suddenly going like, okay, I can't just log in and do stuff. I have to, figure out what the moving parts are and figure out how to coordinate all of that from my perspective or respond to someone else's needs. And for me, that was actually a really exciting opportunity to embrace the challenge of management and leadership and all of that it entails for my team.
Yeah. And I think, there's got to be some definite culture shock. Just, 6 people, everyone in the room, and you guys are in the foxhole together, and 6,000.
Literally all in the room together. Yeah.
All in the room together. It's if you have a question, it's just raise your hand or just blurt out a name. Going to a company with 6,000 people, obviously different challenges, different levels of, familiarity. And when you're kind of looking at that transition and you're evaluating the opportunity, and the reason I'm asking this is I see a lot of people that are startup, work in the startup space, they really don't take the bigger company opportunities seriously unless it's another high tech, really sexy startup. Then they're like, hey, that's cool. But when you're kind of talking to people, like, there are really interesting challenges to solve. When you're kind of looking at your roadmap, and obviously you can compare it to what you did before, Dark Sky and the previous startups. When you're looking at the roadmap and the challenges ahead, I guess I'm sure you get up every morning, you're super excited. But how do you approach understanding the different tools you have and kind of the impact that you're looking to make from the two different opportunities?
On the one side, while that legacy software can be really frustrating, the reality is it means that there's just tons of opportunity, to really say, okay, well, listen, I came from the cloud and there's all these managed services. And yes, we don't have those here in our data center, in our private space, but we can work towards them and we can create analogs to them. So technologically speaking, there's all this opportunity to say, hey, I've seen sort of the cutting edge best practice where there's a green fields forever and you can just choose whatever you love. Can one of those tools work here for us inside our house that we've built? Can we replace something that's homegrown or half built or has lost its owners over the years? One of the things that happens to the legacy companies is things get built and then whoever kind of owned it, decides to move on or changes roles or what have you. And no one picks it back up sometimes because sometimes it's not well documented or sometimes it's not well understood, or it got used quietly by someone else and, just kind of got left running. There's all these ways that these things can kind of happen and become orphans. So there's a ton of opportunity to say, hey, we're going to grab hold of this. And, we used to do secrets this way and we had this homegrown solution and we stored our secrets in our little secret server. And now instead we could go and adopt a software like Vault or some other software like that, and like you get to go on these really cool journeys, and they take a while because it's a big landscape, but you really do get to like pitch that sort of thing. And in our SRE team, at the nexus of so much of what makes Athena go, we have the enormous capability to pull in all these different teams, all these different stakeholders at different levels, from the network team all the way up to, product engineering teams, and say, hey, folks, we see a problem here. We see an issue with how we're handling this kind of configuration or what have you. And we think there's a more sensible way that lowers everyone's burden and makes this more fun for us as engineers. Quite frankly, that's be real. That's a selling point for us as tech people. We like to do fun, interesting stuff. And at the end of the day, it means that the company makes more money. So that's an easy way to sell it up to leadership. So there's a lot of that. And I think that's really compelling. And that's not for everybody, but it certainly gets me going. So yeah.
How do you measure your impact? I guess when you're 6 people and sitting in the same room, you have a pretty good idea how to attribute your impact, your actual production and your code. But when you're among a bigger team, a bigger company, how do you go about actually knowing how you've made the needle move?
Yeah. So this has been a struggle for me. It's hard to measure that. And it's not often quantifiable in the way that you could measure it as, an IC with hands on keyboard, where you say, oh, I made these changes and now the software works better this way. It's faster. It's more responsive. It doesn't fail as often. I added 10 lines of code. Like adding lines of code is kind of silly, but it's still a metric. As, someone in a leadership position, someone doing management stuff, that's not really available. So, I had to kind of sit with myself for a while and go through a long period where I was like, how do I feel about doing this work now that I've really stepped away from touching stuff myself directly? Now that I'm at least one level away from, quote, the real work, even though there's lots of kinds of real work, but we all know how people talk about stuff. And I had to really think like, how do I take the temperature of my team? Because that's my work now. My work is making sure that they feel like they're doing things that are worthwhile, that they're having opportunities to grow, that when they're challenged, that there's someone that they can talk to about that and navigate those challenges in a way that's positive. And, if those challenges are, antagonistic for some reason, they have a disagreement with a coworker or something, that there's a way out, that they feel taken care of, and that they get as much time as possible to do what they're here to do, which is to make things and unbreak things and occasionally break things in a good way. And so I constantly gather that feedback from my team, and my team is awesome. And they are warm and lovely people. And they just are constantly, when I ask them, like, how's everything going? What's happening? How do you feel? I constantly, and it makes me feel great that I must be doing an okay job, because they're like, it's so great that you're here, Jeff. You're taking care of all this stuff. You're talking to all these stakeholders. You're going to all these meetings. You only pull us in when you really need us. You're really careful about spending our time on conversations and things. You just think about the complaints that technical folks have about, management and meetings and talking to people. And obviously, yeah, you can get stereotypical and that's not great, but there's a nugget of truth to all of that. The things that make us happy is making things. And while I am certainly happy making things too, I'm learning to be happy helping other people make things. And that's still a journey. I'm still kind of figuring that out.
That is pretty cool, because I think that's probably, I guess, when you're looking at the amount of meetings, the amount of various processes that now you need to be cognizant of. I mean, you're taking the bullets, the team's able to execute. I mean, that in of itself is fantastic. And when you're kind of looking at yourself, you mentioned, learning, how to better understand and gauge your value to the team and help the team execute better. When you're kind of looking at some of that stuff and you're looking at, how you've been assimilating to the corporate structure that Athena has, anything that I guess if somebody was considering making this move at some point in their life, going from like, small tech startup to large org, anything that you've seen that you go, hey, these are some pointers that you should know getting into a larger org like this?
Yes. The first one is to be really ready for the pace to slow. And that's not actually a bad thing. It seems bad to suddenly go a lot slower, because when you're under the gun with someone else's money, powering your whole life, your whole corporate structure, you're running on VC, you've got an 18-month runway. It's go, 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 go. You just have to scream along, damn the torpedoes, the whole thing. When you're cash positive, 20 plus years behind you, tons of customers, all the other things that go into that, you can take your foot off the gas, and that actually leads to better outcomes. And I think a lot of small firms would benefit from trying to their best to ignore the pressure of the money. because, as the old saying goes, haste makes waste, but it's still a shock. Because even if you're at a place that's really taking care and really being thoughtful, and it's like taking the time to talk to its customers or taking the time to test its stuff or whatever it is that helps you increase quality, the difference is still stark. And Dark Sky was really thoughtful about its software and, was cash flow positive. It wasn't under the gun. So we got to take a lot of care and got to move relatively slowly. And Athena is still, another step back from that. And part of that's the coordination, but part of that is just like, it's okay to not ship it right now. Like we can take another day, we can take another week, we can bring in another team to help us test. There's all this stuff that goes into that and it increases the quality. On the flip side, like if you have something that's really great, there's all these resources to help you figure out if it's a fit. And there's the ability to just like be like, hey, I have this idea to solve this problem that, the interfaces team brought to me. The interfaces team handles data coming and going from Athena from other healthcare providers. So really important, really critical. You say, I have an idea to help the interfaces team. Here's what it is. What do you think? Manager Bob. Manager Bob thinks it's great. Then you take it up the ladder. And there's a ton of opportunity to do that. And then if it gets buy-in, you have resources. You're going to get some folks who are going to go after that. You're going to have people attached to that thing. It's going to carry forward. You're going to bring in what other stakeholders need to make it happen, whoever they are, the interfaces team, their siblings, et cetera, et cetera. And all of a sudden you're in the middle of a year-long project to completely rebuild this huge segment of interfaces, which drives this core function of Athena's business. And there are a dozen examples of that I could come up with that I've done in the last almost 3 years at Athena. And that's like cool, and you don't always have to be the idea person. You can just be like, +1 to that, let's do that. And then you get to go along for that ride. And so there's a lot of really great stuff. And every day, we're dealing with crummy stuff like everybody else, and we're doing the exciting stuff. And the exciting stuff is definitely exciting.
Yeah, that's really cool. I actually like the way you talk about actually slowing down. And you see a lot of times, tech debt be spoken highly of in startups because they, the startup doesn't have a choice. They got to get the MVP out. They got to secure the next round of funding, get more customers, show like they're taking the necessary steps. When you're working at a larger company and you're talking about slowing the pace down, is the notion of tech debt something that? Well, actually, before I ask that, what's the notion of tech debt at Athena? How would that be perceived?
Again, we go back to the legacy software thing. So we have a lot of it. We have a lot of debt, technology wise. And, that's a big part of my job is like choosing how much do we pay down? What do we pay down? And how much new debt do we take on in the service of the business? But kind of what you were getting at, is we have that conversation. We don't just do stuff because we have to do it. And, if there's one person, they're going to do it however they're going to do it, and we'll deal with the consequences later. Instead, we talk about like, okay, so we want to approach this problem, this way. What's that going to cost us? How fast do we have to get there? Is there some deadline pressing on us? Yes or no? Okay, cool. And, and so we actually start to like really kind of pick it apart. We really try to take our time designing the solution instead of just building it. And I spend a lot of time in my days, working with folks to not put the cart before the horse, to not put out a solution that's in search of a problem, but instead be like, what's your goal? What are you trying to solve here? What are you really trying to get to? What's the actual improvement or fix that we're doing here? And is this actually the right solution, or does it just look good? Is it just fun, or is it, interesting, or is it a piece of tech you've just wanted to work with, and like, that's great. And let's not shy away from that sort of thing, because learning new stuff is part of why we do what we do and part of why we're drawn to this work. But you have to balance that individual needs, like, oh, I want to go learn how to write and Go, with, oh, I have to solve this service discovery problem. Like, okay, well, service discovery, console's written in Go. This might make sense. Or maybe we can't just deploy a distributed clustered service discovery system today because that's just too heavy of a lift. And we'll have to do it some old fashioned way with DNS or what have you. And so we try to have those conversations. And I think about that a lot.
I was just going to ask you maybe a final question. I'm cognizant of your time. When you're looking to hire into your team, it sounds like you've got a lot of different technologies and you're looking at different solutions. I know you obviously different roles that are going to play different impacts to the team. But when you're looking at hiring, you have legacy components you're maintaining. You obviously are moving towards a modernizing in some way or form. How do you balance that? That sounds like it's a really more art than science.
Yes, it is. It is. And occasionally we'll have a pressing need for a specific skill set. We have this intense set of like storage needs, and that's a really specialized set of skills. And so for that, we might go look for somebody, who has deep understanding of NetApps or something like that, or one of the other storage technologies we have. But setting that aside, everything else is largely the world of Linux servers. And so starting from the baseline of, have you used Linux? From there, it's sort of wide open fields. Okay, you've used Linux, great. What have you done? And take me through a journey of like something that you've built and administered, or that, you've come up with some kind of pipeline or problem you've solved for your business using an operations, sensibility, where you're pushing this from the SRE book at Google, or you thinking about this, it's more of like, how do you collaborate with development teams and embed yourself? Talk to me about that. But the biggest thing I look for, is we're hiring at this level of seniority. And I want to, try to figure out, okay, what does that mean in terms of like who this person is and what they're bringing? What's their capacity to learn and grow based on what they're sharing today? How willing are they to show me the limits of their knowledge, to say, I don't know when I ask them a question? And how do they react when I talk about, things like, oh, hey, yeah, yesterday I was talking to the data center engineering team and we have to clear like a whole row of servers. So we have to like just suddenly turn off 300 servers in the next few weeks and move them to other racks. Like, what's the reaction to like hearing that that's a project I deal with? Are they like, deer in headlights? Like, okay, let's talk through that. Like, it looks like that's wild and interesting and different to you. Tell me about that. Have you ever done any of this? Have you ever racked servers? And, sometimes you get pointed questions like that. But then I step back from those specific things and I start talking through like, okay, well, tell me more about a time you had to deal with something unexpected. And I come back to that in various different ways and come in at it from very different angles. And I try to tell a lot of my own stories and then ask them, kind of like, what's something like that? And again, it all comes back to what's your capacity to learn and grow, and what's your willingness to be humble in your knowledge and really own the limits of that, because nobody's alone in any team, especially a team as large as ours in a company of our size.
It's really interesting. I'm glad you were able to come on and talk about this, because I think a lot of times we have, people that think moving to, companies that are not, super cutting edge is a step back. I think you kind of described as the opportunities to actually take some step forward and build things that, you wouldn't actually be able to build, at a startup, because you're working with different constraints, and some of those migrations are definitely going to be pushing your skills to the limit. I think that's going to add to your toolbox.
Absolutely. And I mean, I got to say, for all the fun of the other companies I've worked at, this is totally the biggest level of scale and the highest level of like real world importance, I think, that I've dealt with. This really does touch people's lives. And, thousands of servers is nothing to sneeze at, even if there's lots of bigger companies out there. It's a lot, and it's a real challenge, and it's cool.
Awesome, man. If somebody wants to ping you, just to talk about your experience or anything else, what's a good social, or what's a good way of getting in touch with you?
Yeah, I mean, obviously LinkedIn messages are the quickest one for professional stuff. And I try to be pretty responsive to that, in spite of, certainly the recruiters are always out there looking for folks. But you can find me on Twitter at the Jeff Byrnes. And, Amir will probably have my name spelled on this, so you can spell it. It's not spelled the usual English way. And you can just email me also at thejeffburns@gmail.com if you want to have a personal chat that's a little more longer in length. But yeah, happy to talk stuff anytime. Happy to talk about what it's like at Athena. We are looking for folks to join the team like everybody else. I'm looking to hire folks onto my team. I got 2 spots to fill, and we're doing big stuff here. So yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll make sure to include some of those links on the show notes, so if somebody wants to reach out, they can get a hold of you. Again, thanks for being on the podcast. I really enjoyed chatting with you.
Yeah, no, thanks again for having me, Amir. Thanks.
Awesome. That's it for this episode. We'll be back again, different guest, different topic. And until then, I always ask for 2 things. One, if you like the podcast, we've been growing because you guys have been sharing it. So thank you for that. And share it with somebody that might find it interesting. And secondly, if you want me to talk about a topic, hit me up on LinkedIn. Let me know what it is. I'll do my best to line up a guest. Until next time, goodbye.